number of the electrons. Not really, you do not really resolve the your momentum of those electrons. So this is one example of the density of states that you get in XPS. So this is a material called BIPD. So we have done experiment on it with this much of photon energy at 50 Kelvin. So these are the core levels, and your valence band is somewhere here, and this scale is the kinetic energy, and this is the intensity. Okay, now if you look closely here, which is zoomed in here, so this is the Fermi levels. You can see after some kinetic energy, there is no electrons are there. So this is the Fermi level. So Fermi level here is roughly around 594.45.45. So we take it as 0 and change the scale of this, change the kinetic energy scale to binding energy. So if you change it that way, by taking Fermi energy as 0, then this is the energy scale that you get. And after you get this spectrum, rescale this spectrum, so you match with the binding energy already reported binding energy, and from there we can see, so these states are the core level. So this is for example, these two are for PD palladium 3p states. So this is 3p 3/2 and this is 3p half, and likewise this is Bi 4d, that is bismuth 4d, this is 5/2 and this is 3/2. So this particular method is called XPS, X-ray photoelectron spectroscopy, and this is mostly used for your chemical analysis purpose. Now I will discuss the model of this phenomena, which is photoemission. So theoretically, this model is called three-step model, where we think this photoemission process is happening in 3 steps. So look at these schematics. So this is your material. So Z less than 0 is your material, Z greater than 0 is vacuum. Okay. So initially, when there is no photon falling on the sample, so the electron wave packet is initially in a state where its momentum is Ki and energy is Ei. And in the first step, it absorbs the photon and goes to a state where it has energy EF and momentum KF. So this is the first step, which is known as optical excitation of electron wave packet. This is the first step. And in second step, that electrons travels to the surface. That's the second step. And in third step, it is to the surface. And in vacuum, we measure these two quantities, KV and EV, along with the number of electrons. And from there, from this information, we can actually find out what are the values of Ki and Ei. I mean, while it was inside the sample without any excitation. So this model is known as three-step model. So now in our case, as I said, in conventional photoemission, where I get the density of states of the material, we do not really find out the momentum of the outgoing electron. Only the number of electron and their kinetic energy is measured, and from there we get the density of states. But in our case, we also find out the momentum. So this is a schematics. So actually we do not directly find out the momentum, we find out the angle of emission with respect to the surface normal. So we have three information actually: the number of electrons, their energy, and at which angle they are coming out. So take this schematics. So this is the sample. So light falls on it, electrons comes out of the sample. These are the X and Y axis which are fixed to the sample. And this is our hemispherical electron analyzer. So this analyzer actually finds out the emission angle, that is theta, and the energy of that particular electron. You can see this slit. So this hemispherical analyzer has 2 slits. One is this entrance slit, another is this exit slit. So here in this case, the y-axis is parallel to the entrance slit. So the electrons that are coming out along the y-axis, and basically the electrons which have y momentum, they can actually go through this slit. If any electron has any x momentum, then they won't be able to go through this entrance slit. So if you want to, so that means that at any given time, you can actually probe electrons only along one momentum direction. Now, if you want to probe electrons along the other momentum direction, that is x-axis or any other direction, then you have to rotate the sample. So if you want to measure the electrons that are coming out along the x-axis or which have some x momentum, only x momentum, then you have to rotate the sample by 90 degrees so that this x-axis is now parallel to the entrance slit. Now those electrons will go through it. So that's how we measure the dispersion, I mean the energy versus the momentum. So once we have this information, the information about its energy and angle, so using few formulas, so this is the dispersion relation and other few formulas, we can find out the momentum. Now these electron, for this case, see, while the y-axis is along the parallel to the entrance slit, the electron will have two momentum. One is this y-axis momentum, another is this z-axis. It is the third direction. So the electrons will have this two momentum. So once I have these values, I mean the energy and your theta, then I can actually find out this y momentum and the z momentum. Okay, and we can later on talk about it if anybody has any question. And but one important thing is here that, so with these formulas, I mean anybody can show that there is a one-to-one correspondence between the photon energy and kz momentum. So basically, if you want to vary the kz momentum, you have to vary the photon energy. So whenever we take the spectrum, we keep the photon energy fixed for a particular spectrum. So that means for that particular spectrum, your kz momentum is fixed. Now, if you want to change the kz momentum, you have to change the photon energy. So now I'll discuss the experimental conditions. So basically this photoemission experiment has to be performed under high vacuum, ultra high vacuum. So the vacuum should be of the order of 10 to the power of minus 11 or 10 to the power of minus 10 torr. That means the electron analyzer that I showed, the hemispherical dome and the sample and the excitation source, everything has to be mounted inside a chamber. And the chamber should have this much of vacuum, 10 to the power of minus 11 torr. And in general, the sample temperatures are kept low. I mean, that depends on which kind of samples you are studying. So that depends on the sample, whether that sample temperature should be low or not. But in general, we keep it low. So why the ultra high vacuum is required can be seen from this plot. So this is a plot between electron mean free path as a function of electron kinetic energy. It says that, I mean, how much an electron can travel inside a material with a given kinetic energy without going through any inelastic scattering. So electron, because the photoelectrons that are coming out of the sample after absorbing the photon, so they should not go through any inelastic scattering while they are moving inside the sample. Otherwise they will lose momentum, they will lose energy, and the information will be scrambled. I mean, you want to find out the momentum and the energy, and if they goes through an inelastic scattering, then those informations are lost. So if you see, so given, I mean, it's a huge range of kinetic energy. It's plotted from 5 eV to 5000 eV, and you can see, I mean, within this range, the electron mean free path is only few angstrom, maybe 30-40 angstrom is the maximum. So basically, I mean, if you are performing the experiment, it doesn't matter how thick your sample is, the electrons only near the surface can come out of the sample. And because of that, your sample has to be very clean, because if your sample surface has some layer of dirt on it, and few layer of dirt means, I mean, it will be few angstroms of thickness. So that means the electrons won't be able to come out, because while they will be traveling through this layer of dirt or layer of impurity on the surface, so they will get inelastically scattered. So during this experiment, the sample has to remain clean. So for that, we have to, I mean, mount everything inside a chamber where we maintain a ultra high vacuum. I mean, once we clean the sample remains clean for a long time. I mean, even if the oxygen deposits on it, the atmospheric oxygen or atmospheric any other molecule, your water molecule or nitrogen, if anything deposits on it, I mean, that will make the dirt layer or the impurity layer thick enough so that the photoelectrons cannot come out of the sample. So the sample surface has to remain clean. So that's why this ultra high vacuum is required for these experiments. Now I'll give you some examples. So this is the first example. So this is on the experiment is performed on bismuth selenide, Bi2Ac3. So this is the band structure of the material, you can see. So this is the momentum axis and this is the energy axis. So this is a zero level, that is the Fermi level. So below below this energy, all the energy states are filled up, and above it, all the energy states are empty. But so this is theoretically calculated. So this zero energy level may not match with whatever we find experimentally. So because this is theoretically calculated. But in any case, if you look at this, so there are many bands. All these blue lines are bands. So these blue lines inside this gray region, you can see the gray region. This gray region, the blue bands inside this gray region are actually three-dimensional bands. So that means these band energies depend on three momentum. These are three-dimensional bands. So these are three-dimensional bands inside this gray region. So that means they depend on the band energy depend on three momentum. So one is kx, another is ky, another is kz. But this blue band inside this box, dashed box, so that is a two-dimensional band. The band energy depends only on two momentum. You can say it kx or ky. So this is a two-dimensional state of Bi2Ac3, which is found on its surface. So if you draw schematics of this particular band, which is called a Dirac cone because it has this cone shape. So the schematics looks like this. So basically these are the two energy momentum axis, kx and ky, and another is this your energy axis. Okay, now if you perform experiment on this sample, ARPES, so you will find this kind of spectra. So the photoemission has been performed with three different photon energies, 30 eV, this is the 30 eV spectrum, this is the 50 eV spectrum, and the same spectrum at 90 eV. You can, I guess you can understand the color plot. So wherever there is white, there are electron, and wherever there is black, there is no electron. So you can see you can clearly see this cone shape here. Okay, at every photon energy, you can see this cone shape, and in two of these photon energies, you can see this particular state here. So theoretically, we know that whatever we are getting, this particular cone, that is two-dimensional, that it depends on only two momentum, kx and ky. It doesn't depend on kz. And whatever we get here are actually three-dimensional band. That is, whatever you are getting here, it's a three-dimensional band. That means its energy depends on three momentum, kx, ky, and kz. Now that is theoretically known, but experimentally, how do you find? If you have many bands inside one spectrum, then how do you know which is three-dimensional, which is two-dimensional? So for that, we have to perform the experiment at various photon energies. So likewise, that is done here. So if a particular band or energy of a band doesn't depend on kz, so then one more thing is that, so earlier I said if you change the photon energy, so that is equivalent to change the kz. So I am changing kz, I am changing photon energy, that means I have changed kz. So this particular spectrum has one kz value, this one has another kz value, this one has another kz value, which depends on the respective photon energy. So basically, you can see, so this band has now become a function of kz. It has become a function of photon energy. So in one photon energy, it is seen, in another photon energy, it is not seen, and again in another photon energy, small part of it is seen. So that means it depends on the photon energy, equivalently depends on the kz momentum. But the other band, that is the this cone structure, so that is completely independent of the photon energy. I mean, the intensity can depend because the photon count in different photon energies could be different. So by varying photon energy, actually we can find out which one is the three-dimensional band and which one is the two-dimensional band. So if the band position varies with the photon energy, it's a three-dimensional band. If it doesn't vary, it's a two-dimensional band. So now I have plotted the Fermi surface, you can see. So Fermi surface is the zero energy contour. Zero energy contour in the momentum space. Here zero energy and Fermi energy are the same thing. Earlier I said that in most of the cases, we take Fermi energy as zero energy, and we accordingly scale change the scale of the energy. So Fermi surface is nothing but your zero energy contour in the momentum space. So here, by looking at this figure or any of these figures, you can see the Fermi energy lies here. So this is your zero energy. Okay. So basically in these schematics, the Fermi energy is somewhere here, and the Fermi energy cuts this cone. So the cut will be of a circular shape. So you can see that's why the Fermi energy comes as circular. So it's in this momentum plane kx and ky. Okay, so this is the first example, and this is another classic example of gold. So this is again a surface band, whatever we have imaged here. Uh, so this is found on gold 111 surface. So this is the band structure of the gold. So all the lines are the bands. So this is again the momentum axis, and this is the energy axis. So all the bands inside this gray region are the bulk band, and these two bands, these red and blue bands, so these are the surface bands. So if we zoom on this around this part, so you can see the structure more clearly. So this is the momentum, this is again binding energy. So these are the bulk states, and these are the surface states, the two-dimensional states. These are three-dimensional states, these are two-dimensional states. And there is a clear energy gap between these two states. And this is called the Rashba splitting. So in 3 dimension, if you want to picturize it, how the band looks like, because these two bands, they depend only on kx and ky momentum. So I can plot it out. So it looks something like this. So this third axis is the energy axis, and they look like this. So now in photo emission, as I said earlier, at any given time, you can image only along one momentum direction. So it doesn't matter which momentum direction here you take, because it is isotropic. So any momentum direction is equivalent to the other momentum direction. So here, if I image this band, it will look something like this. You can see here the color plotting. It is the momentum axis, this is binding energy or the energy axis, and the third direction is your electron intensity, which is given in the color scale. So basically wherever there is white, there is electron, and black means there is no electron. So you can see, so it looks like a two shifted parabola. I mean, if you take a cut through this of the schematics, you will get two shifted parabola. So in this case, you can guess how the Fermi surface would look like, although I have not shown here, but you can guess. So from this figure, you can see the Fermi level lies somewhere here. That means Fermi level is somewhere here. So if that Fermi level cuts it here, so you will get two concentric circles centered around this your kx ky momentum. So you will get two concentric circles in this case as your Fermi contour, or the your Fermi contour. So these are the two examples now. So now I'll go on to discuss the many body interactions that can be traced using this methodology. So far what I have shown is that, I mean, this technique is quite useful in revealing the band structure, the overall band structure, how the energy of any electron varies with momentum can be imaged. I mean, overall band structure along different momentum direction can be imaged. So for that purpose, this method is very useful. But it can also reveal your many body interactions in the system. By many body interaction, I mean electron-electron interaction, or electron-phonon, electron-plasmon, these kinds of interactions. So whenever we talk about the band structure, we know that, I mean, that band structure arises because of the interaction between the periodic potential of the lattice and the electron. So that interaction gives rise to your band structure. And we most of the cases, we do not consider the other interactions which are there, like electron-electron Coulomb repulsion, then your electron-phonon interaction. Electron-phonon interaction is that, I mean, we assume that my lattice is periodic, but that is true only at your zero temperature. I mean, when there is no phonon inside the system, when there is no vibration. But at some particular energy, at some non-zero temperature, these atoms or the ions at the lattice side, they start to vibrate. So basically then the periodicity of the lattice is not maintained, although it is deviated, but although it's small, but there is some deviation. So that particular deviation from this periodicity can also alter your band structure. So those deviation, they actually interact with the electron and they change the energy of the electron. So my band structure will now look different if this deviation field interacts with the electrons of the system. So this is one schematic. So this is taken from Ashcroft-Marmin. So this is the momentum axis, this is the energy axis. So this is your parabolic band. So this band is derived without any electron phonon interaction. So nearly free electron band. Now if I assume assume there is some electron phonon interaction inside this material, so we will see that this parabolic band is not there anymore. I mean, the band structure will deviate from this parabolic shape. So, and that will happen only near the Fermi energy, and that energy window within which this deviation will occur is given by your Debye energy of the system. So you can see, so this is the zoomed in version of this. So this straight line or this parabolic line, so this is the band structure of the material when there is no electron phonon interaction. But with electron phonon interaction, so these would be the band structure. So these are the phonon kinks. So the energy of the band structure has changed. So this is what we call as the renormalization of band structure due to electron phonon interaction. And this is seen in many metals. I mean, this is the theoretically predicted picture, and experimentally it has also been verified in various materials. So one example I have taken here is the molybdenum. So this is again a surface state. So this is the color plotting. So black means there are electron and white means there are no electron. So this is again the energy axis, and this is the polar angle, the angle of emission. You can convert it to momentum also. So now you see near the, it may look like a parabolic band, but if you zoom in on it, you will see there is a certain kind of kink shape has developed here. So it's not parabolic anymore. To see it clearly, they have traced this peak position of this band. I mean, they have traced out this band. You can see this black filled circle is the actual band that is seen in the experiment, and this white dotted line, they have drawn it as a schematics. I mean, that should be the structure of the band if there is no electron phonon interaction. So now you can see there is a clear deviation from that linearity. So this is your one example of electron phonon interaction in metal. So now we'll show another example, and this is the last example. So so graphene. So graphene is a two-dimensional carbon material. So graphene, many of you know that it has a conical shaped band structure. So it's a two-dimensional material. So the electrons inside the graphene moves in two dimensions. So basically, the energy of this electron depends on two momentum, kx and ky. So I can plot it out. So this is the energy axis. So this is the graphene band. In experiments, so these are the bands that we have got. So these are three different types of sample. So you can see, so this is the color scale here. Red means there are electron. So for the so I have also drawn these black lines. So for the clarity. So now if you compare these three figures, so you can see the cone is very clearly seen. So this is your it is called Dirac point. So I have given the Dirac point with respect to the Fermi level. So this is the Fermi level. In these three figures, these are the Fermi levels. So with respect to the Fermi level, I have given the binding energy of this Dirac point. So now if you compare this three figure, you can see in this one, in this sample, only a little part, very small part of the upper cone is seen. This is the lower cone and this is the upper cone. Only a very small part of the upper cone is seen. Now if I start filling electron inside this system, then more and more of the upper cone will be revealed. So basically in this case, you see a larger part of the upper cone is revealed. So in this case, the electron density or the carrier density inside this sample is more compared to this sample. And in this case, where the I mean quite a bit of the upper part of this cone is seen. So it has a highest amount of carrier density. So this particular sample has the highest carrier density, and this one has the lowest carrier density, or your electrons inside the sample. So now I will show, I mean, you can see the effect of electron phonon interaction on this band structure. So basically these bottom panels are exactly same as this top panel. So I have only just expanded this momentum axis, nothing else. So you can see, if you look closely, then none of these Dirac cone are actually a perfect cone. So for example, if you take this one, so you see, I mean, below this Dirac point, the band was varying linearly. It was almost linear, but as soon as it crosses this Dirac point, you can see this deviation. Otherwise, it should have, I mean, if it were linear, it should have gone this way, but it has deviated from that line. So this is due to the phonon. As I said, I mean, the phonon king comes near the Fermi surface, or the Fermi energy, sorry, the Fermi energy. So this deviation occurs around 195 MeV below the Fermi level. And the dy energy of this sample is around 200 MeV. So it's quite matching. And this particular deviation can be seen in all the three figures, in all the three plots. So that is the effect of electron-electron on your band structure, sorry, electron phonon interaction on the band structure. Now I will show how the electron-electron interaction is also present here, and how it influences the band structure. So in this case, in case of graphene, it is known that if we decrease the carrier concentration inside the sample, the electron-electron interaction will increase. Because if you decrease the carrier concentration, so basically what happens is that your Coulomb interaction between two electrons is not sufficiently screened. So basically the two electron can interact with each other through Coulomb repulsion very strongly. So basically here, the Coulomb repulsion between two electrons would be higher compared to this sample. So basically this sample will have stronger effect of electron-electron interaction compared to this sample, and that I will show. See, now it is theoretically predicted that electron-electron interaction actually gives rise to a deviation of the linear band structure near the Dirac point. So see the schematics. So this outer cone is your Dirac cone without any electron-electron interaction, or with the minimum electron-electron interaction. Now if I increase the electron-electron interaction, so now my cone will deviate from the actual linearity and will become this shape. So basically the deviation increases, and that happens near your Dirac point, this crossing point. So that can be seen here. You can see I have drawn an arbitrary straight line. The blue line is the band, and this there is an arbitrary straight line here. You can see there is not much of a difference between this blue line and this straight line, but this difference is gradually increases in this direction. You can see the difference between the straight line and this band increases here, and it is much more here. So basically this band is actually deviating from the linearity, and this is what is predicted from theory. I mean, if the electron-electron interaction increases in the system, and which happens when the carrier density decreases, then your band structure near the Dirac point will deviate from the linearity, and you can see the deviation increases in this direction. So that is the signature of the electron-electron interaction. So with this I will finish. So in summary, so photoemission technique is based on your photoelectric effect, and three-step model we use to describe this phenomena. And to keep the sample surface clean and to perform the experiment for a longer time, we have to perform these measurements in ultra high vacuum, and along with the single particle band structure. So this technique can also reveal the many body interaction. So the effects of the many body interaction on the band structure, I mean, how the electron-electron interaction, or electron phonon, or electron plasmon interaction, so how those interaction actually I mean, you can alter your band energy, the electronic energy. So that can also be revealed. So with this, I end my talk.
Thank you, Arindam, for this wonderful talk, and it's really a pleasure for us to go with you along in this ride to the world of ARPES, and we virtually clap this endeavor, and we will have the question answer session right away. So the first question is from Krishnendu. Krishnendu, I have asked you to unmute. You can unmute and ask your question. Okay, I don't know, is there any problem, but his question is Bi2Ac3 is a topological insulator.
Yes, it's a topological insulator. You can see it from here. Although to say whether it's a material is a topological insulator or not, you have to do the band structure calculation. Without theoretical calculation, it cannot be said. But one thing you can see it from here. So this band structure, so you can see, so topological insulator, so the property of that material is that, so the bulk band structure, it is insulator in the band, insulator in the bulk. So basically there would be a band gap in the bulk, and that you can see. The gray region is the bulk band, and you can see there is a energy gap between these two gray region. So that means it's a insulator in the bulk. But in the surface, you can see this is the surface band structure. So there is no gap in this band. So this band crosses, it actually connects your bulk valence band to bulk conduction band. So basically at surface there is no band gap, but in bulk there is band gap. So it's a topological insulator. So that can also be seen from the experiment. This is bulk band, and these bands are also bulk. So there is a band gap in the bulk, but in the surface there is no band gap. So that is it.
Okay, so I hope Krishnendu, your question is answered, and others also can participate by asking question. I have a question from Shonot. Shonot, I have asked you to unmute. Can you unmute?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Yes,
hear.
yes.
Yeah, thanks Namda for the talk. So I had one question. So at the very last slide, so where you discuss basically the electron-electron interaction, and to see how it manifolds in the experiment. So here you say that the deviation from the linearity is basically is a signature of electron-electron interaction, right?
Okay, and so just for one correction, so the deviation from linearity can happen in two ways. So due to electron phonon interaction, and also due to electron-electron interaction. So due to electron phonon interaction, it happens near the Fermi level within your dBi energy. Okay, so and the deviation of linearity due to electron-electron interaction happens near this node point. So that's it.
I see. Okay, so that was my question. That when you are saying that the linearity deviation from the linearity is the electron-electron interaction signature. So I was wondering why not on the upper cone. So yeah, so that is for electron phonon interaction, as you mentioned, right?
So now
because it is in the dBi energy range.
Now if you see here for this sample, you can see, I mean, the Dirac cone, this cone, you can see the cone. The Dirac cone is within the dBi energy region. Okay.
Right.
So here near this Dirac point here, both the electron-electron interaction and electron-phonon interaction are present. You cannot really say, I mean, why this deviation is linearity is there. I know this deviation is due to electron-electron interaction, because it is almost about 400 MeV from the Fermi energy. So there the electron phonon interaction cannot be there, because the dBi energy is only 200 MeV. So up to 200 MeV, so I can have the deviation due to your electron phonon interaction, and beyond that, whatever your deviation is there, that is due to electron-electron interaction. And in this case particularly, those two interactions are mixed up here. I mean, their contribution.
Okay, and another one small question. So on the top panel, so where you have color maps, so looking at the color plots, I mean, it's not very obvious at which point is the crossing, like the black curves that is there. I mean, so if you see at the very left figure, so this crossing point, I mean, how to decide this crossing point? Crossing point?
Okay. So here actually from this figure you cannot find out where is the crossing. It can be anywhere between this region, anywhere inside this region. Okay, so for that we have to perform the experiment in some other way. Okay, so we do the experiments with some other photon energy with varying polarization. So where only this band is seen or this band is seen. Okay,
Okay.
So they are here because we are actually imaging the two bands, this left band and right band. Both these bands are getting imaged here. That's why you cannot actually see, I mean, where is the crossing point. But if you are able to image this band and this band differently, I mean, respectively, once you image this band and this band, then this band, then from there you can find the dispersion. So these lines, these black lines are found from those spectra.
Okay.
So where I have only this band or this band. So that has been now superimposed on this figure, just to show where is the crossing point.
Yeah. And another small question. You told that for the 2D band structure, to image that, you can basically see the XPS at any particular in any momentum axis direction, right, in XY plane, and basically from that invoking the isotropy of the band, you complete the band structure.
Here, in this case.
Yeah.
Oh no, actually, we do not actually invoke the isotropy. If you look very closely, the spectrum, it doesn't look actually isotropic. There is, I think, in here, I think 6-fold or 3-fold symmetry is there, or 4-fold. I don't remember. I mean, gold is, I think, FCC. Gold is FCC. So there is 4-fold symmetry in this case, if I remember correctly. So there doesn't look exactly circle. But if you have to actually complete this 3-dimensional figure, okay, then you have to image this sample along different direction. Earlier I said if you remember, earlier I said that, I mean, so this is one momentum axis, this is another momentum axis. Okay.
Right.
First you make this y-axis parallel to the slit. Then, so in that case, you image the momentum along this y-axis. Okay. Then you rotate the sample by few degrees, and then take the same image. Okay. And then you again rotate it and take another image. So basically, by rotating the sample, you can probe actually different momentum direction, and from there we can actually construct the whole 3-dimensional thing. We do not invoke the isotropy there. We actually perform it by varying the sample position, by rotating the sample.
So here like error bar in the momentum is is basically restricted to how accurately you can change this theta, right, of the sample. So that is done very accurately.
Just a minute. Just a minute. Tell me, what are the question?
Can you go back to the slide number 5?
Okay.
So here you change the angle theta to get the momentum of the photo emission electron at different momentum directions, right? So that theta, the error bar in this theta, so that will come in the spread in the momentum.
Okay. The thing is, actually we do not vary theta. So we vary only theta. If you, let's say, if you want to image the momentum direction along y direction, maybe along 30 degree, maybe along 60 degree, then maybe along 90 degree, which is x axis. So in that case, we only vary the angle. But if we want to construct the total 3-dimensional thing, then that won't help, because you won't be able to plot it. Okay. So because there are many more angles are there, I mean 0 to 90, how many angles you can go?
Right.
And because it cannot be plotted. So instead of that, we do the tilt mapping. So I mean that is actually hard to explain here, how we do the tilt mapping. So we do that, and instead of rotating the sample, we tilt the sample for that purpose. I mean, if you want to find out the 3-dimensional thing, you have to tilt the surface, tilt the sample. I mean, you have to rotate it with respect to x-axis, not rotate about with respect to z-axis, whatever I said now. To find out the 3-dimensional thing, either you have to rotate it about your y-axis, about y-axis. You have to rotate that way.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so our next question is from Dibya Shankar. Dibya Shankar, can you please unmute?
Yeah, hi. So Arindam, I have 2-3 questions maybe. So one from this slide itself. that so in your curve, I can see that the band structure from gamma to K point is like this, from gamma to M point is like this.
This one.
So yeah, in typical EK diagram, you can say like that.
No, this is
But
the slide you're talking about, na?
Yeah.
Okay.
So so how you decide that whether it's along gamma to K or it's along gamma to M? How you decide that in experiment?
Okay, for in experiment, actually, you have to first align your sample using Laue diffraction. Okay, so there are 2-3 axis systems. I mean, you have a so I have to say it. Okay, so using Laue diffraction, we do it. I mean, I have to first put my sample in the Laue chamber, and I have to fix any random direction. Okay, so now from that random direction, I have to go to that particular direction, and whether that particular direction is achieved. I mean, let's say I have a sample and I want to align it in such a way that the c-axis of the sample is towards me. Okay, so in this case, let's say, so this is your, this XY axis are your lab axis or lab axis, and there are 3 crystal axes are also there, A, B, and C. And now you want to align your sample in such a way that the C axis is along this and your B axis exactly is parallel to this slit. Okay, so in that case, so you have to do the Laue diffraction, and Laue diffraction will tell you, I mean, whether your sample is properly aligned. I mean, it's really hard to say in this way unless you see the Laue spectrum once. So that actually tells, I mean, how much angle you have to rotate about x-axis or y-axis or z-axis to make b-axis parallel to this slit and c-axis perpendicular to this. So
you continuously map that the Laue diffraction.
No. No. First, we actually that these measurements are done in situ. Okay, so once you put it in the sample chamber inside the vacuum, so you cannot take it out. I mean, while the measurement is running on. So outside we do this. We know. I mean, we actually mark the sample. Okay, you can use pencil or anything. You can mark the sample. So okay, this direction is my c-axis. This direction is my b. This is a. So we actually manually mark it. From Laue diffraction, we actually mark it, and exactly maintaining those angles and those positions, we put the sample inside the chamber. So that has to be done manually outside the chamber, and with Laue diffraction, that can only be done.
Okay. And another thing, just correct me if I were wrong. So what I realized that this normal XPS or UPS and RPS, the difference between that is you only have this slit, so you can select your direction on the sample, right? Is it true?
So that is also true. That is also somewhat true. The slit size is almost equal in all of the cases.
No, I'm talking about experimentally how RPS is superior than XPS or UPS.
Okay, XPS. Okay, I'll show you. So this is your XPS spectrum. You can see that. Okay, it just
I'm talking about like the experimental setup. I mean, physically, when you were performing this experiment, in your setup, what is different? What was not in XPS, and but you have that.
Okay. The only difference is your energy source. Nothing else. Only difference is that the value of this H cut omega changes. Nothing else. Everything is same. So we have this machine here. I mean, with the same machine, with the same setup, we do RPS, we do XPS. There is no change. So the slit size, everything is same. So only the photon source changes.
I see. And the last question in your BI263 slide, if you go. Yeah, so here in the you mentioned this Fermi surface, the right lowest. So is it for some specific energy or for any energy of photon? For any photon energy, this will be the Fermi surface.
This will be the Fermi surface for any photon energy. You will just see the intensity will be in some cases. Anyway, this is an arbitrary scale. you can make it more darker or anything. So basically, if you change the photon energy, nothing will change. It will look the same. So the relative intensity, you can see if you compare.
Then, yeah. So then. Yeah, sorry. Then my question is, so if you cut, can you hear me?
I can hear.
I have some network issue, I think. So anyway, my question is that if I understand it correctly, that a Fermi surface is basically a two-dimensional cut at energy equal to 0, right? So
yes.
If you take a cut for 30 eV, the curve you have there, 30 eV and 50 eV and 90 eV, then if you have a cut, you should have two concentric
similar circle,
surface
same
for
circle.
30. Okay.
Same circle with the same radius, everything same. But you can see from 30 eV, you might get a contribution from this bulk band also. So there would be another circle. There could be another circle because of the bulk band. Because there is another band also. I mean, the Fermi surface cuts also the bulk band. And I don't know how its Fermi surface would look like.
Yeah, that was I expecting. Like if you cut the surface for 30 eV, then you should have two concentric.
So that I can get. And actually, they are very close in energy. So they are very close in energy in this case. So probably,
I see.
So probably these two are merged here.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So our next question is from Joydeep. Joydeep, can you please unmute?
Yeah. So thanks. So my question is about the experiment. So when you detect the photoelectron, let's say, so how do you differentiate between whether it is carrying information about the surface band structure or and the bulk band structure, or is it just you use a slit, so it will only have the two component of the momentum, so you just prove surface band structures?
No. So I mean, as I said here, so I am just measuring one component of the momentum, just I said. So here in this figure, if you see, so there is only one momentum scale. Okay, there is only one momentum scale, and there is another momentum, that is kz. So if you see in this case, so kz is this axis, and this is the kz. Okay, so only one momentum axis is there, so that could be kx or ky, is just arbitrary. Okay, and there is another momentum which is fixed for all these electrons, and that is kz, and that is determined by your photon energy. So that kz value changes if you change your photon energy. Now you see, so in this case, in this particular spectrum, you have two kinds of bands. One is 3-dimensional, one is 2-dimensional. The 2-dimensional band is the cone, which depends on only k and ky, and the other band, that one depends on your kz also. So and changing photon energy means changing kz. Okay, so if you change photon energy, you will see this band is moving upwards, downwards, or shape change. Anything can happen. I mean, if the band is showing any change with the change in photon energy, that has to be 3-dimensional. And the other one is 2-dimensional, which the 2-dimensional band won't show any change, and that is the only way we actually differentiate between 2-dimension and 3-dimension by varying the photon energy.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah, got it.
Okay, so right now I don't see any more hands. So in the meantime, maybe I can ask a few questions. So I just had a question connected to this, so I can ask right now. So in the top left panel, where you have the schematic, you don't have any bulk bands or 3D bands inside the dashed black line, right?
Because that's the bulk band gap.
There is a bulk band gap, but in the ARPES spectra, then why do I see the 3D bands? Means I should not see, right? Because this matches means close to the 0, there is no band. Yeah.
Okay. Now, if you see, this 0 scale here is not actually correct. This is theoretically predicted. Theoretically predicted prediction, what it says that the Fermi level should go across this Dirac node. this cone. Okay, it should go across this cone. So from theoretical prediction, the Fermi level should lie here, but actually this sample is electron doped. So that's why you get the Fermi level here, where you can see some of the bulk bands also. So this theoretical prediction is not correct. If you want to directly match it with the experiment, this zero energy has to be shifted to here.
Okay, got it. Thanks. And another thing is that when you increase the photon energy, so I just trying to understand in the ARPES spectra why the middle one is like the cone is like having most intensity. Like I expected that when you increase it even more, should not the 90 eV spectra have the most intense like cone in the top half?
Now so this is a false color scaling. Okay, so there is no absolute color scaling between these three spectrum. Okay, I can make it much more dimmer, this color scale. So these are individual color scale. So you cannot actually compare between all these three.
Oh, these three.
So I can make it much more intense.
Scale. Like
the color scale look like the right one is the color scale, but here if you see this particular, here you can see it is much more intense. Okay, so basically the absolute I can manipulate the absolute value of the electron count could be very different.
Correct. Okay, thanks. And is there a way to count that?
This one actually you can have. If you take a cut which we call as EDC or MDC. So basically, if you take a cut, if you want to see how many electrons are there, okay, like I will show it here. This one. This is the gold surface band. Okay, so if you have this spectrum, you have this spectrum. Now you see this figure. So this one is called your momentum distribution curve. So this is a curve which is taken across this figure, across the spectrum. I think near Fermi level. They have not mentioned it. So I guess it's near the Fermi level. Somewhere here, near the Fermi level, you have taken a cut across this Fermi level. Now you can see, so if you go along this line, so there is no electron, there is, while you are in this black region. Now as soon as you encounter a white region, the intensity goes up. So that is the intensity peak. Now again, so the intensity will be a little shallow because there is a some black region between these two bands. So the intensity will go down, then again you hit the another white region where the peak is there. So again the intensity will go up. So in this way you get this graph. So now here you actually get here they have normalized this figure, normalize this graph, but you actually get the count. Maybe it is 20,000 or 30,000 or 50,000. I mean, it depends on for how long you have taken the spectrum. So if you want to make it much more sharper, then you perform this experiment for 2-3 hours. Then you will see that their electron counts will be in lakhs or millions, and it would be very sharp. So that's it. But the ratio between these two peaks, the peak ratios between all these 4 peaks will not change. They will become much more sharper. That's it. There will be no noise.
Last question from me is that recently we have kind of flat band systems in graphene area, so where the bandwidth is like few milli-electron volts. So does ARPES give enough resolution to resolve this kind of bands? Means what is the resolution of typical ARPES region?
Energy resolution typically is 10 MeV, you can say. People, I mean, they quote it as 5 MeV, in some cases 1 MeV, 2 MeV. But in those cases, I mean, you have to adjust the experimental setup in such a way that your experiment time actually goes up very high. So you can, and as I said, I mean, you cannot perform these experiments for a very long time because the oxygen, nitrogen in the chamber, whatever the residual gases in the chamber will deposit on it. So you cannot do it. But the resolution can be achieved up to 1 MeV. It's possible. I mean, there are some beam lines, international beam lines, where you can do it in at the resolution of 1 MeV, or some laser sources are there where they give you 1 MeV or 2 MeV of resolution. But these experiments, as I showed here, this particular graphene, here the resolution was something like 10 MeV was the resolution.
Okay, so actually the energy of the source dictates the resolution. Is that it?
Not the energy of the source. Actually, what I mean, they in the beamline they use these monochromators. So the efficiency of the monochromator, or how they are, I don't know exactly. So basically, how well they separate out the different energy, photon energies. That also depends on the particular energy of the photon, I guess.
I
So
see, okay.
I won't be able to exactly tell. I mean, how do they? I mean, do it beamline.
Okay, that's fine. So the width of the slit that you showed, like to get a direction, so that in experiments that width is also finite. So does that hamper the resolution as well? Like that width of the slit also has a x extension. So some kx will also come in and stuff like that.
So that also hampers. That also hampers. So if you make it very small, so the less number of electrons will come. I mean, will go inside the electron analyzer, and the experimental time will also increase. So we have to, I mean, make a trade-off between these two things. So we keep it as finite, maybe 0.3 mm of the slit width, around that much.
Okay. So there are two questions in the chat box. So one is from Vikas Saini, and he's asking how much energy resolution is there in RPES. So I guess you answered, but you can please mention it.
In general, you can see, I mean, people mention it as 5 to 10 MeV,
Okay.
or 15 MeV in some cases. So that depends on the particular beamline.
Okay, and final question is from Krishnendu, and he's asking why the electron-phonon interaction is prominent near Fermi energy. I guess he meant electron-electron, and means why is it prominent near Fermi energy is what he's asking.
Okay, the electron-electron interaction he asked.
No. He asked why the electron-phonon interaction is prominent near Fermi energy.
And that actually the thing is that can only be there, because what does this electron phonon interaction does? So basically, if you take it as a perturbation, so phonon field is just a perturbation field to the electronic system. And now if you use your perturbation theory, you will see that the electron can go from one level to another level due to this perturbation. But here, if you take electron here, if you consider one electron here, and if you ask, I mean, will it interact with this phonon and go to a different state? It won't be able to go, because the phonon only has very little much of energy. So this electron cannot go, I mean, if it absorbs a 20, maybe say 30 MeV of the phonon energy, so it cannot go to this state, because this state is already filled. Okay, so the higher binding energy electrons, they cannot participate in this electron phonon interaction. Only the electron which is near the Fermi level, so there, let's say this electron can absorb a phonon and go to this state, and also can come back. So basically, the electrons that are near the Fermi level, they can absorb they can absorb phonon and go to a state which is not filled. But and that's why they participate in this electron phonon interaction. But here it's not possible. I mean, if you give some finite amount of energy to these electrons, so they won't be able to go anywhere. So they won't be able to participate in this interaction anymore. I mean, at all. So only the electrons near the Fermi level, where they have a chance to hop to a state which is not filled, so there the electron phonon interaction is there. So that's why it is only confined in this region. You see, I mean, above the Fermi level you have unfilled state, and below you have filled. So using phonon energy, this electron can hop there and also can come back, but that cannot happen here. So that's why this electron phonon interaction is actually confined near the Fermi level.
Okay, I hope Krishnendu's question is answered. And we have a question from Rishabh. So I asked him to unmute.
Hi, Arinanda. Actually, I asked that question from the Rishabh laptop. I'm sure it here.
Okay.
I have go to the 10th slide. I have just one question. So partially you answer few of them, so I don't repeat that question. So I generally expect that electron phonon coupling is symmetric around Fermi level. Okay. So, but if you see, this the top one has a clear deviation, but the bottom one there is a respect to the Fermi level, there is no such deviation. Why so means why it is the interaction?
Which one? Which one? This figure.
Yeah. Yes.
In this figure.
So I generally know that electron phonon interaction is a symmetric around respect to your Fermi level. If you see,
But.
So, but here, if you see, there is a clear asymmetry in the interaction.
I mean, between these two bands, you see.
No, with the top and the bottom.
Oh, okay. The bottom panel is same as the top panel. Okay, I have just to for the clarification.
So the 0 is my Fermi level. The bottom graph I am showing where the two bands are crossing, and the top, the respect to the Fermi level top, there is a clear deviation from the linearity. So I can easily see this is the electron phonon interaction. So I expect that the line also should have a.
No, here also I have this deviation. This is my Fermi level. So here the zero energy is I have taken as this energy I have set as 0. The Dirac point energy I have set as 0. So with respect to now I am now scaling everything. But your Fermi level is here. You can see the deviation from the Fermi level. So if you follow it from here, the Fermi level, you can see there is clear deviation here. So if you go. So if you follow this line, this band, you can see the band is almost linear. Now it crosses your Dirac point. Now it suddenly, deviates from the linearity. So this deviation, you can see this happens at around your 200 MeV, 190 MeV. So that is also there. This is the same figure.
Yeah, well, I just want to look at symmetric picture what you taking from the ASCOM margin. That is the same clarity has happened crossing around the Fermi level or not. But if you see the ASCOM margin picture as you have put it, they have symmetric around the Fermi energy. So that's what I was looking for. Basically.
Okay. No. The Fermi energy here, this is the Fermi energy.
Okay. So I don't have that upper one. I can able to see only the bottom.
Okay, no. Actually, this energy scale is now different. Just for the comparison purpose, this energy scale now different. Okay, I got it. So this 0 is not the Fermi level here. This is actually the Fermi level.
I see. So okay. So then now the second question is that as you mentioned the resolution, but I was suspect that also actually it is also depend upon your detection also. No, actually is the intensity you are doing on the pixeling. So
yes, that also depends on the pixel also. But actually, with that pixelation, actually, if that pixelation, if you just take into account that actually gives you 0.13 MeV, I guess, if I remember correctly, 0.13 MeV.
Okay.
I mean those pixelation, so the distance between two pixels is very less.
That is the uncertainty at a particular momentum in energy. Is a 0.13.
No, actually, I don't know whether that is the uncertainty because this is actually detected with your multi-channel detector. So basically, multi-channel detector. So basically, the channel. So this is mechanically machined. These are machined channels. So how closely you can put those channels? So they already have, so the distance between two channels is micro. I think 10 micrometer or 6 micrometer. I don't know. I mean, if it is possible to put them even closer. So probably that comes from the machining itself, I guess.
Actually, this question is coming from because of the slide number 9. To show the deviation is so much away from that linearity. It is hard to say that it is within the error bar or not. So that is
actually I showed it because this is the most easiest paper to understand on this subject probably, and that was the first one. That's why I showed. But you can see in this case it's very clear. I mean there are now many papers where you can very clearly see it. But this was the first paper that showed it. That's why I have just shown. But otherwise any unsuspecting mind won't be able to see it at all. So if there is anything, so that was the first paper, and then this is a very famous paper. That's why I just showed it.
This is the case. Okay, thanks a lot. This is there. So originally, as you mentioned, there is. So this is actually the limit that what kind of an interaction I was looking for. Even it is in the ARPES, I am going a little bit away from it. So in the RPS, one can also talk about the electron-magnon interaction in the magnetic system, is that have the same resolution power, like a magnetic system, whereas you have a or the spin interaction, which is more weaker than that. Like I think in your lab is known for the Kondo.
Kondo, actually, I don't have much idea because I don't work on those systems, because I don't know. I mean, if those interactions.
Interaction is also able to can be resolved, na? If this is
Yes. There are, I mean, electron polaron interaction, then your electron plasmon interaction. So all those can be resolved. In graphene itself, electron plasmon interaction has been shown in one sample. So it's very clearly seen. I mean, those can be resolved very easily.
Thanks, Arindam. It is a nice talk. Thanks for having you here.
Thank you.
Okay, so further questions I will request to email to the speaker, and I will just end the session with Joydeep's question. He had a question, I guess. So Joydeep, can you unmute if you have a question?
Yeah, I had a very small question. So sorry. So for graphene, you said the Debye energy is around 200 millielectron volt. So that would also change with temperature, or basically for any material, how one get that energy scale. So is it the theoretical calculations, or?
This is theoretical calculation. Yes. Theoretically, you find the phonon spectrum. And also from neutron diffraction, I guess, they also find the phonon spectrum. So you can directly match it with the experimental, the theoretically calculated one. But these are all theoretically calculated.
And that will depend on also temperature, the Debye energy?
No, that doesn't depend. So, no, those are all fixed. Only the number of phonons in those energy modes will change with the temperature. I mean, those things are fixed. Your phonon spectrum and everything is fixed, unless the material is going through any phase change or anything. So those things are fixed. Only thing, if you increase the temperature,
occupation will change. Okay.
The occupation will change.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we have come to the end of this wonderful session from Arindam Da, and thanks to Arindam Da for being so patient and answering all our questions. And so thanks to all who have come here in the Saturday morning to join this talk, and we hope to come back again next weekend. So stay tuned, we will keep you in the loop. And so yeah, have a great weekend. So we are ending this session now. Thank you, everyone.